The Empress of Light and Duke Fishron are by far the most impressive boss fights in Terraria, or at the very least the most well-liked. But of these two bosses, there has to be an answer between which one is better. Some players will say that Empress of Light is better, some will say that Duke Fishron is better, but I want to offer my perspective. So, let's ask, what is better, Duke Fishron or Empress of Light? Let's get started by talking about the boss loot, because I would say that that's just as important as the gameplay itself. Both of these bosses have incredible loot. They both have equally amazing wings, they both have very good expert mode drops, and they both drop 25 coins each. Obviously, some people will prefer the soaring insignia, while others will prefer the shrimpy truffle, but I think in terms of sheer quality and how useful they are, both of these accessories are very good. The shrimpy truffle is fantastic for traversing the world, and while it's not really useful in a lot of boss fights, if you get a bunch of water, it really can be. And then the soaring insignia is just obviously fantastic. The ability to have infinite flight with any wings that you use is unbelievable. Both of these accessories basically make the game a cakewalk, and if you have either of them, I'm sure you're going to really appreciate them. Getting to the weapons that both of these boss fights drop, I think that they both have a little something for everybody, but Duke Fishron and Empress of Light do have different appeals for different classes. Duke Fishron is better for the magic class. The Bubblegun and Razorblade Typhoon are fantastic weapons which can basically carry you to the end of the game. And while the Empress of Light does drop some decent magic weapons, they aren't quite as unique or recognizable. Empress of Light, though, is way better for Summoner. The Kaleidoscope and Terra Prisma are both fantastic weapons that can defeat Moonlord with ease on lower difficulties and in general are great for crowd control. For melee players, I would say that neither boss is really that good for either class, so it doesn't really matter. And for Ranger, I would say that they're pretty equal. If you use the Mage class most of the time, you're gonna love Duke Fishron's drops, and if you use the Summoner class more often, you're gonna love the Empress of Light's drop. I will say, however, that a huge benefit to Duke Fishron is the fact that you can fight him before any mechanical boss and collect the same loot. It's probably a little bit too difficult for most players, but if you know what you're doing, you can fight Duke Fishron before the mech bosses, or even before Queen Slime, collect some amazing items like the Bubblegun or Razorblade Typhoon, for example, and then you can carry yourself all the way to the endgame with those weapons alone. Is it a little bit cheap? Yes. Are most people probably gonna use it? No. But is it cool that you can do that and very useful for some players? Absolutely. I've always thought it's weird that the Empress of Light is actually locked after post-Plantera while Duke Fishron isn't, even though they have very similar gear and they're both pretty difficult. I definitely think the Prismatic Lacewing, which summons the Empress of Light, should be available beforehand. In terms of loot, I would say that they're both pretty similar, but I would give Duke Fishron a slight edge. Once again, it comes down to your preferences, but the fact that you can fight Duke Fishron at the start of hard mode and get his gear earlier makes it a little bit more valuable. And if you could fight the Empress of Light earlier in the game as well, I would really say that it's equal. Moving on to the gameplay, which is just as important, this is gonna be a little bit more subjective, but it's obviously very important to talk about. Duke Fishron and Empress of Light are both the hardest bosses in the entire game. Maybe one could argue that the Moonlord is harder than Duke Fishron by a slight, a little bit, but I would really say that these two are the most challenging enemies for most players in Terraria. While Duke Fishron can be pretty difficult, I would say he's actually very simple once you learn how he works. He only has 3 real attacks. He charges at you, he summons Sharknadoes, and those Sharknadoes summon out these little sharks that, fly out and try to hit you as well. That's it. There is nothing else to him. This is the reason it's very easy to cheese Duke Fishron in early hard mode and get his gear. Pay attention to the Sharknadoes, make sure you have a big arena, and then just circle around him like you would basically any other boss fight in Terraria, and you will be able to defeat him with ease. Obviously, that's a very convenient thing for people who want to get his gear earlier in the game, but I do think it makes him a little bit less interesting. One thing I will give Duke Fishron, though, is that he has a third stage, which no other boss in Terraria does. It's only available in expert mode and higher difficulties, but Duke Fishron's third stage is very cool and makes him a much more interesting boss fight. It shakes it up a little bit, he's not just charging at you 4 or 5 times and then sending out a Sharknado and then repeating. He charges at you once and then twice and then 3 times and repeats. Again, it's still easy if you know what you're doing, but it is much harder to dodge and much more complicated, which I think is awesome. Moving on to the Empress of Light, it's fair to say that this boss fight is a lot more complicated and a lot more complex than Duke Fishron. Duke Fishron only has 3 attacks, which is pretty standard for Terraria bosses, but also doesn't really make him stand out, while the Empress of Light has 7 completely different projectile attacks, making her the most expansive boss in the game by far. What makes this great is that even though she has the highest number of attacks in the game and they all do a lot of damage, it is by no means unfair. She still has a very deliberate pattern which you can learn and adapt to. That doesn't take away from the difficulty, of course, but it's still a lot more interesting to fight a boss that's fair and difficult over a boss that's unfair and difficult. Don't get me wrong, she's not an easy boss fight, and whenever I try try to fight her, I do struggle from time to time. But with that difficulty also comes a great balance, where if you die to Empress of Light, you're not going to blame the boss fight or the developers. You're going to say, that was my fault. I really think it's the closest thing Terraria has to perfect boss gameplay, and one of the best bosses in video games in general. The Empress of Light isn't easy, but she's fair. She has a lot of attacks, but they're also very easy to adapt to. She has a great sprite, she has fantastic music, and overall I would say that I would give the win to Empress of Light. Better music, better overall theme, better sprite, really good gameplay. I mean, the Empress of Light is just a fantastic boss fight. What do you think though? Do you think the Empress of Light or Duke Fishron is a better boss fight in Terraria? Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.